Hello everybody, I am the Linkzilla. Well, it's been a few days since I posted my video talking about Jurassic World Dominion, and I gotta admit that I am excited for the movie. However, I do have to admit that Jurassic World Dominion is going to be facing a whole lot of hurdles in regards to what it is going towards, and unfortunately, I can already sense that Jurassic World Dominion is going to be flawed, but unlike me, who can actually enjoy something for its flaws, the rest of the world just isn't going to get it because they're already being unfairly critical towards this movie. And, well, I felt like it was time to basically take a moment to make a video to just sort of get my thoughts out of my head and sort of break down what is going on with not just Jurassic World Dominion, but also the entire Jurassic franchise up until this point. So, what problems do I know that Jurassic World is going to face? Well, I was perusing YouTube last night, and this is really one of the things that I honestly can't stand because I enjoy listening to movie criticism from a whole lot of creators on YouTube. Unfortunately, I keep coming across videos or posts from creators that I actually enjoy whenever they're talking about things like Marvel or the CW, things that are actually worth getting outraged over. But then they start talking about Jurassic World, and they are so far off the mark that I just want them to go away. It's like, stick to what it is that you actually know what you're talking about, and leave Jurassic Park, the entire franchise, alone. Because it's clear, you never got it. You never once got it. Now, I'm not trying to be dismissive of criticism. What I'm trying to be dismissive of is people who are automatically making assumptions based on faulty logic. What I'm fighting against is basically the people who only form their opinion based on literally nothing, and the sheep who end up following them. Now, don't get me wrong, in this day and age, it's easy to judge a movie for what it's going to be based on what you see in the trailers. And a lot of it, basically with these movies nowadays, we can get a sense of what the movie is going to do, because let's face it, the movie is basically spoiled in the trailers anyway. Jurassic World Dominion is no exception, but I honestly feel like the audience is being unfair towards it. What am I trying to get at here? So many people have hated the Jurassic World trilogy for simply existing. Why? Because they think, and I quote, the idea of using dinosaurs for military applications is a stupid and bad idea. And my response to that is, yeah, that's the point the movie is making. That's the point the franchise is making. I honestly cannot believe that it has to be said, but here it goes. The people who criticize the Jurassic Park franchise have never got it, because the simple fact is, Jurassic Park isn't about the dinosaurs. It really isn't. The dinosaurs were literally a means of the story getting attention. But the bigger issue of what Jurassic Park, especially the novel, was stating, what really is bigger and what is at stake, it's basically a lot more important. And the dinosaurs were a consequence of that. So, fundamentally speaking, what is Jurassic Park actually about at its fundamental basis? It's a story about consequences. It's like I said in one of my previous Jurassic World videos, and I'll say it till the day I die, Jurassic Park is a franchise about people making bad decisions because they're not considering the consequences. It's the irresponsible use of science and technology, and the movies themselves are dealing with the consequence. That's effectively what Crichton was going for. The dinosaurs, they're the spectacle that draws the audience in, but the substance always has to do with the critical commentary that Crichton was making at the time. And the worst part about it is that you go back and read the Jurassic Park novels, most of what Crichton predicted in those novels has actually come true, and it's honestly scary. It's honestly scary how accurate he ended up being before his untimely death. So, but what am I trying to get at here? The issue is that the reason what Crichton was doing is that he was making a commentary about the irresponsible use of science and technology, especially in the field of genetics, that was in a major boom in the 1980s and carried well over into the 90s. And he chose to set it in a theme park because he's making a commentary about the theme park business, because the whole idea about it is that you've got these people who are trying to control this technology and this science to create a living life form and then control that living life form. But the problem is, you can't control it. A theme park is literally the embodiment of an area, an environment that's manipulated to be 100% controlled by the people who own it and operate it. But that gets tricky when it comes to animals, because no matter what happens, you cannot 100% control an animal that you have in captivity. And these animals, the dinosaurs, there's so little known about them that you could spend years studying them and researching them before putting them into a park setting and still not know thing one about them. How can you predict an animal that basically has been brought back from extinction, and how could you ever assume that you can control it? You see, that's what Crichton was really getting at. He was making a commentary about the misuse of science and technology and the bad business practices of the theme park. And let's face it, theme parks are basically one of the most duplicitous and irresponsible businesses on the planet, and Crichton basically realized that while researching not just Jurassic World, but also when he was directing Westworld. He was literally making these stories to do a commentary on the dark side of Walt Disney. The idea that basically, you can basically, believe that these creators just want to put on a spectacular show and spare no expense, but what you're not seeing is all the chaos and turmoil that goes on behind the scenes. So, that's what the stories are really about. It's misuse of science and technology in order to create something that frankly, well, was going to go out of control. The first Jurassic Park movie, the outbreak that happened, it wasn't just Nedry turning off the fences in order to steal the embryos. It was literally an inevitability. And I literally read in someone's comment section last night that they literally cannot believe that they boiled it down to that they despise the fact that the movies are treating it like an inevitability, whereas they consider the first one an act of God. And as Malcolm would literally say from the novels, sorry, God has nothing to do with any of this. Because literally speaking, not only was it not an act of God, there was literally nothing about the first movie that was in any ways divine intervention. Because I think a lot of people have a misconception that the storm somehow knocked out the power on the island. And I just can't help but think, did you guys even watch the movie that you claim to love and praise so much while you're hating on its sequels? No. The storm didn't knock out the power in the island at all, because literally a storm wouldn't be able to knock out the electricity generated by a geothermal plant. It's not how it works. The power was to the fences and all the security systems was literally turned off by a man on the inside who was conducting industrial espionage, and that is the consequence that Michael was talking about, because stuff like that was an inevitability. The Jurassic Park novel goes to great lengths to explain that Hammond, InGen, and all of the Jurassic Park company was under strict guidelines to not let any information about Jurassic Park leak to the public until the park was ready to be unveiled. And that frustrated a lot of people working at the park, especially like the people in the advertising, because they basically were their publicists. They have to have something to work with to give to the marketers, the campaigners, the people that they're going to be selling the advertisements to. They got to have something to work with. In fact, the only reason that Jurassic Park was largely funded by Japanese investors is because the Japanese were willing to be patient for the Jurassic Park to be developed and everything to be ready with no return on capital for 5 years. So effectively speaking, well, all of it, the novel goes into detail about how it had to remain a secret, and despite the secrecy, Dodgson still found out. He was able to put together what they were doing, and it's actually incredible how he does it, but I'm not going to spoil it for the novel. The point is that he figured out how to do it, and he realized that InGen was going to build a dinosaur-themed merchandising empire around the park, and he knew that if they didn't act fast, they were going to get left behind. Especially because, according to the novel, a genetically engineered animal can be copyrighted, meaning that the InGen DNA for the dinosaurs would have been copyrighted for the InGen company, meaning that if Dodgson didn't get his hands on the embryos now, they would basically fall under copyright, and then he'd never be able to produce them. He had to get his hands on the embryos, modify their DNA just slightly enough, and then he'd be free to breed his own dinosaurs to compete with InGen. You see what I'm saying here? Crichton is making a commentary about corporate espionage and corporate competition. So inevitably, well, yeah, it's like I just said. This was literally inevitable. It was always going to happen. It's like in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Wonka literally has the best candy on the market. Of course, spies from rival companies are going to try and get into his factory and figure out what it is he's doing, stealing some of his ideas, changing them slightly, and patenting them as their own. That's a fact of life and a fact of business. So, yeah, it was inevitably going to happen. But anyways, so, in the grand scheme of things, what is it that I'm actually so concerned about with so many people being unfair to this movie? Well, like I said, one of the biggest problems that I have with how people are treating these movies is the idea that they think that because they can see that something is so stupid and will never, ever possibly work, they think that that somehow justifies that the people in the movie itself would never be that dumb to do it. There's an old saying, basically, about 50% of the people in the United States are below average. So you need to basically think about how stupid you are, and then you need to look all around you and realize that a majority of people surrounding you are probably dumber than that. And that's something that I'm learning day and day, because I even got people in the comment section who claim to have read the novel hating on the Jurassic World franchise because I don't even care what their reasons were. Effectively speaking, if they actually understood the novels the way that I do, they would realize that the Jurassic World movies, while not perfect, are literally continuing what the Jurassic Park franchise was all about. The consequences. Just because an idea is bad doesn't mean that nobody is going to do it. They're not considering the consequences. I mean, and to the people that basically have spent the years criticizing Marvel, Warner Brothers, Disney, the CW, all these woke companies doing bad ideas because they're not considering the consequences, and they have literally a mound of consequences from all the previous times they've done it before. Do you honestly think that that's going to stop them from making these consequences again? Literally speaking, Lucasfilm is now a consequence-free zone because Kathleen Kennedy literally keeps making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Literally speaking, she is back in the news trying to save face over the disaster fire that was Solo, a Star Wars story, by blaming it on Aaron Ehrenreich, or whatever his first name was. She's blaming the entire thing on him because, he just couldn't replace Harrison Ford. No, it has nothing to do with the fact that the movie was A, boring, B, over-sexualized, and C, literally cucked Han Solo. So, what I'm basically saying is, just because it's a bad idea doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I hate to say it, but you know how obnoxious Jurassic Park 3 is? Literally speaking, Jurassic Park 3 is boiled down and so simple that it literally hammers the message of the entire franchise over your head with the friggin' megaphone scene. It's where Miranda is calling out for Ben and Eric with the megaphone when they first land on the island, and Kirby shouts out to her, "Dr. Grant says that's a bad idea." And she's like, "What's a bad idea?" And then later on in the rest of the movie, at the end, when they basically get when they get to the beach, there's that guy standing there with a megaphone, and he starts calling out to them. They run forward. It's a very bad idea. That's the point. Just because it's a bad idea doesn't mean that people are going to do it, or doesn't mean that people are not going to do it. And honestly, that's what I like about the Jurassic Park franchise, because it's more realistic to reality. People are capable of making mistakes. The heroes are capable of making mistakes. Because regardless of how likable Grant, Ellie, and Malcolm are in the novel, and by proxy the movie, they all contributed to the creation of Jurassic Park. In the smallest way, they share responsibility for what happened because they basically contributed to it. Now, granted, Malcolm and Ellie were not as informed as all the others that were involved in the park. All they did was give advice about how to feed and take care of baby dinosaurs as speculative theories. And they also dug up bones to contribute for the genetic haul that InGen was getting. Malcolm, on the other hand, he shares a huge responsibility. And I honestly think that that's why in the original novel, Crichton originally had it that Malcolm died due to the events of Jurassic Park, because he was meant to be the contrast to Hammond. They were supposed to be the conflicting ideological forces, but they both shared responsibility in the creation of the park. And worse is that Malcolm knew exactly how the park was going to fall apart and collapse, and yet instead of explaining how, when, and why it was going to happen, he literally just sat back and gloated and waited until it did. So as far as I'm concerned, despite the fact how much I like Malcolm's character, he is just as responsible for all the deaths that occurred at Jurassic Park, because he could have warned them. He could have said, no, this is how it's going to go down, and this is where it's going. Now, the novel literally says that the InGen engineers ignored it because they said, no, this isn't a problem. This turbulence is supposed to happen. We expect that this is like how it's going to be, but it'll fall under control eventually. Instead of basically being adamant and saying, no, you've got to basically go here and shore up these areas in the park. You got to double check them. You got to make sure that everything is within your control, because right now you're being too complacent. Malcolm was instead complacent in just sitting back and letting reality prove his theory for him. So, in essence, because Malcolm wanted to stroke his own ego and, by contrast, destroy Hammond's ego, as well as the confidence that the Jurassic Park engineers had, the animals started breeding out of control. They started sneaking onto the ships that were headed for the mainland, where they spread into the jungles of Central America, and a whole lot of people got killed. You see, the novel is different from the movie. Both have inciting incidents where, because the electricity to the security systems was shut off by Nedry, that's the catalyst that sets everything off. But in the movie, that's the only event that happens. In the novel, they managed to get the park under control again, but the problem is, because the dinosaurs are smarter than the humans give them credit for, there was no putting it back in the bottle at this point. There was no basically stopping them. The Jurassic Park novel is a domino effect. It's a case study in the butterfly effect. How one simple action has great consequences. And that's what it all circles back to. One small inciting event has huge consequences that affects the entire world. So, in summation, if Jurassic World Dominion is going to be the concluding chapter that wraps up all 6 Jurassic Park movies, what can we infer from that? We can infer that across this entire franchise, the very first mistake, the very bad idea from the get-go, was when Hammond and Lockwood brought the very first dinosaur back from extinction. And this movie will be the consequences that are displayed in this movie will be the end result. Because it ultimately doesn't matter who did it. Because Hammond, Lockwood, they're both dead. They can no longer assume responsibility. But the fallout of what they've done is going to affect the entire world, and it's going to be bad. This is the movie, the consequences that are coming to fruition. And I have said that from the very beginning, because every single movie in the Jurassic Park franchise has adapted the Jurassic Park novel in some ways. No one movie is a complete one-to-one adaptation. They have to adapt the novel across all of them. Every single movie has a piece of the Jurassic World novel in it. And Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, that is the novel's epilogue, where it's discovered the dinosaurs have gotten off the island, even though the island has been destroyed. They're getting out into the wild, and they're going to proliferate, unless something is done to either stop them or rein them in. So, all that being said, Jurassic World Dominion is what is going to continue that thread of exploring the consequences of how this series is going to play out. I hope you all enjoyed this. This is part 1 of this little unscripted rant that I'm going to go on, because there's a whole lot about Jurassic World Dominion that I really want to talk about, and there's only so much time I've got left to do it in. So, hope you guys enjoy. Hope you guys join me again for part 2. Hope you guys like and share this video, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.